Hi, everyone. Thank you for listening to Horror/Stories. This week, we are talking about the movie and the book Misery by Stephen King. And we are featuring a special guest, J.C. Murphey, who is a lover of romance, but a writer of dystopian fiction. Collectively, Murphey has been writing for 20 years and stockpiling all sorts of spooky, gory projects that she's slowly dragging back out into the light of day. J.C. Murphey lives in Texas with her husband, daughter, 2 cats, and a dog. So while she may seem heartless, ruthlessly torturing her poor characters, she assures you that she has some semblance of a heart somewhere. J.C. Murphey has awards and nominations, including Best Dystopian and Best Fantasy from 2024 Indieverse Awards for your novel Don't Fear the Reaper. And you are participating again with your novella Dorian Gray, which is up for Book of the Year for Indieverse Awards and Best Novella.
Yeah.
Welcome.
10 out of 10.
And I should also say, did I say I'm Sarah? And with me also is our lovely co-host, Nenia.
Hello.
Yeah, thank y'all so much for having me on. I'm so excited. As soon as I heard about y'all's podcast, I was like, this is like the combination of all the things that I enjoy. Scary movies, scary books, put them together. Love it.
Yeah, I'm so excited to talk to you about so many things, about your books, about writing, and about Misery. I have so many thoughts and feelings about it.
Me too.
Yeah, I've been reading Don't Fear the Reaper. I am like 30% into the book. So I didn't finish it in time, but it's very like, I keep seeing people describe it as anime-esque or anime vibes, and I totally see that. It's very visual. I could totally see this. Like, I want someone to animate it.
Oh my gosh. And it's actually funny because so I started writing the book like 7 years ago, and I was still in college, or I was just getting out of college. And that was like my hardcore, maybe it's like the dissociation thing of being in college and having to like study and stuff. But that was my hardcore anime era. I mean, I've always been a fan, but I started writing that book kind of like on and off while I was still, I was actually rewatching Bleach, if y'all are familiar. Which now that I say that, maybe it makes a whole lot more sense. But yeah, I do get a lot of comments that it's very like, it would make a really good visual novel. And I don't know, maybe fingers crossed that's something in the works, but alas, that's expensive. So buy my book so I can get a visual novel out of it. But yeah, that's awesome. Thank you so much for picking it up. I really appreciate the support.
And I know you have it on a whole bunch of different platforms now, because you recently, you were on Kindle Unlimited before, and now you're branching out so people can get your books on any of their favorite platforms.
Yeah, I'm everywhere, and I sell my ebooks and physical copies on my website. So that's pretty cool. People have been buying my ebooks on my website. I'm just like, oh my gosh, people are downloading my stuff. So that's awesome. It's very cool. But yeah, I've thrown it out into the world, and maybe it'll land somewhere. So
I decided to split the labor because I was reading Dorian Gray, and it's interesting that you say like that Don't Fear the Reaper is like dystopian, like kind of post-apocalyptic anime style, because the vibe that I'm getting from Dorian, like, is it like a prologue? Because it feels almost like folk horror, dark cottage core with like the witches and like the sacrificing.
So, and maybe this is just the twisted way my brain works. So this is meant to be a trilogy, and literally like 2:00 in the morning, Dorian Gray hit me like a sledgehammer. And I wanted to include it in the same universe because, you know, I'm just really in love with the setting. I'm in love with the characters that I've already kind of established. But Dorian Gray is actually set far in the future of when Don't Fear the Reaper and Don't Fear the Dark. And the last book is going to be Don't Fear the Legion. And so this book is actually set far in advance, kind of like filling out like everything that's fallen, everything that's fallen into place from what the trilogy is going to end up. So it's kind of like this weird little like goalpost, I guess, so to speak, because it's so far in the future of what's already, so it's kind of like the aftermath, right? Of like what's what the trilogy is going to shake out to be. So like it was kind of fun to throw in like little things, like little teasers of, you know, how the series is going to end out. And you know, maybe in hindsight I should have waited, but I'm just not a patient person. So I was just like, publish it. This is so awesome. I love this story. So it's definitely it's definitely a departure from the main series in terms of, like you said, like the anime-esque, like the vibes. It was definitely a very experimental book for me. It was in third person, which, you know, my other books have all been in first person. And it was the first book that instead of writing in chronological order, I actually just wrote it. You can think I'm so crazy. I wrote it with the scenes that I was most interested in. And then I reorganized it to make a story. So, that was kind of like my fever child. But I think that's been my most enjoyable story to write so far. But yeah, I think it's definitely a big departure from the main series. And that's why I just kind of like separated, like, this is a novella. This is the main storyline. So yeah, very cool. Yeah, thank you so much for supporting. And I picked up Nenia's book too, the Through a Door Darkly, Through a Glass Darkly.
Oh yeah, the vampire one.
Yeah. I'm also like 30% through that one too. So we're all like
30%. Yeah, actually I think I am 30% of the way through Dorian Gray. So clearly that's like the number.
So funny.
Like, all of our lives are just like stacked like that, right?
It all comes down to the number 30.
Right.
That's so funny. I was going to say, I wonder what the numerical symbology. I'm going to stop trying to talk that word now. But yeah, I think the writing process is so interesting, how different authors approach. Some just like dive into the process. Some people have an idea, like scenes that they want to base, like the scene is the starting point. So I think it's really cool hearing about everyone's process.
I think that's the coolest part about being an author is just like when you actually get to talk to the people that are writing the books that you're reading, you're like, oh my gosh, I have so many things to ask you, but I also don't want to spoil my story. So like
that very much relates to what we're going to talk about today. But before we get into Misery, I want to ask you a few questions about just like your background, and one of those would be, have you always been, or do you consider yourself a horror lover, and what is your horror origin story?
Actually, I feel like my horror story, like my love of horror, didn't really start until I started writing Don't Fear the Reaper. I don't know like how much of my origin story is still online, but I actually started this story in Kindle Vella. If y'all are familiar with like the episodic platform that Amazon used to have, that RIP, like it just went away. But I actually started Don't Fear the Reaper on that platform in 2023. And I had marketed more towards like young adult. So I took like the actual like book that I ended up publishing was much more gory and violent than the book that I had on Vella. So it kind of like went through this evolution. But I didn't really get interested into like the horror genre and the elements until I started rewriting the book. Because I mean, you think about it, like the concept of death and the concept of like, you know, apocalypse and like people's morals in a dystopian world, like those are all very like morbid and sometimes gory, violent. And so I think I did a lot more research after I started like rewriting the book. But ironically, I also got into horror after I had my daughter. And I don't think that's a direct correlation. I hope not. But I just really got into like the visceral like emotions. I mean, you feel like it really just brings out like the very base levels of people when like they're put into those kind of like scary situations. It's kind of like your fight or flight instincts. And so like, I just think it's so interesting to see like how authors make characters react in this very like unusual, atypical way, just because of like the situations that they're being put in. So, and I think every author does it a little bit differently, right? You know, some authors are like, they're all dead. Some authors like, no, they're going to fight. And some of them are like, no, they're not going to fight. So I think it's just really interesting how every author like makes their character approach and deal with these horror situations that they're put in. So I really like it.
Yeah, absolutely. And Nenia, I know that you have written some of your books on Kindle Vella as well. Um, what have both of your experiences been publishing serialized works? And I know it's different now that Kindle Vella is going away, but was that something that you wish there was more of an opportunity to explore?
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak for JC because I know everyone's author experience is different. But for me, like I started out as a serial novelist. I used to publish my works for free when I was a teenager in the early 2000s on the wild west of the internet. And I think it trains people to write engaging stories like from the get-go. Like I have an author friend, Percy J, who writes fantasy, and she has a controversial take on TikTok that every single line that you add to a book should add something of value to the overall story. And it doesn't have to be like the plot. It's just like develop the character, like engaging dialogue, like spur on to the next line. And I think serializing encourages authors to do that because it is a serial, and so you have to end the chapter with something that makes people want to keep reading. And so I do think it trains you to be a very engaging, like fast-paced author, but that wouldn't necessarily work for something like literary fiction. I think it's particularly good for like genre fiction.
I totally agree. And kind of like adding on to that, I was a teacher. So like I'm all about like the plot graph, where you start with the exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, resolution. And when you're writing serialized fiction, you think about like every chapter being its own little mini story, kind of like what Nenia was saying, because you want the reader to be engaged with the chapter so they want to read the next chapter. And I think that it really it like you said, it trains your brain to think of like every chapter in your book as adding something to the plot, because every chapter is its own little story, so to speak. So I think that's sometimes where I struggle a little bit, because I feel like I'm a very like concise writer. Like it was honestly a struggle to get Don't Fear the Reaper to be over 60,000 words. Like I was really like pulling fingernails, like, do I really have to describe this? Like, I mean, come on, like people know what a car looks like. Like, who cares what color it is? And I feel like as a reader, I'm kind of like that too. I don't really want to know like what the whole landscape looks like. I just want to know what it is as it pertains to the story. And I feel like that's kind of where I get caught up. I feel like I have to describe it a little more because like in your head, you know what it looks like and you don't think it contributes to the plot. But maybe for someone else who wants to be like very connected to the landscape, connected to the setting, connected to what the characters look like, it is important to them that you give a little more description on what they look like. So I feel like that doing the serialized fiction really helped me grow as an author, because it helped me develop that drive in the plot, to make it like where every chapter was adding on a little bit until it gets, but also being able to hold back the main plot a little bit, because you want that build of suspense with every chapter. So I'm definitely very grateful that I was able to do the Kindle Vella. And before that, I was a reader of the Wild West fiction. So we might have still been in the same circles. We just keep following each other, right? But I definitely am very grateful. And like a lot of authors that I know that ended up going indie were also from Vella, which is kind of weird to think. I mean, even some big names like Christina Farley. She was in Kindle Vella, and there were just so many others. Just like, wow, like we all started down here. So it's very cool to just kind of see all the authors like branching out and seeing their books like in that full format. Be like, oh my gosh, I totally read this chapter by chapter, and it still feels like a whole different experience. Just reading it as like one whole book. So yeah, it was really cool. I'm very grateful for the experience.
I love that idea. And I think there's such a rich history of serialized writing. But but also just what you're talking about, descriptions, your novel so far is so vivid. Like it's so visual. So I think you really are, if you weren't already doing it, you're nailing it.
Thank you.
So do you consider yourself easily scared? And what do you consider scary?
I would say it definitely depends on the type of horror. I'm all about like the gory, like Texas Chainsaw Massacre or Saw or like all those like super like dumping like gallons of blood on the set. That's my kind of jam. The Ring will scare me like no other. Like like the TV is upstairs,
scary.
and every time I hear a thud upstairs when I'm laying in my bed downstairs, I'm like, oh my gosh, that was coming after me. Because I just have like this vivid imagery of her just like falling out of my TV and making this like thudding noise. So like that kind of like supernatural, specifically Japanese supernatural horror is the scariest thing. And I didn't realize my husband's Japanese. Shocker, right? But I was kind of talking with him about, like why Japanese like supernatural stuff is so scary. And it's because the way the culture is, like if you mess with the supernatural spirit, like the Grudge, like the curse is forever. There is no resolution. There is no happy ever after, right?
I was going to ask if you'd seen that one, because I think the Japanese version of The Grudge is probably the scariest movie I've ever seen.
Yes!
It's so scary.
Yes, and I hate how the American one's like, la, in the end. I'm just like, no, like, you don't understand. Like, it's still there.
I also feel like Japanese horror, like, kind of has, like, I feel like they use their environment more, like the ambient horror, because everything is so, like, interconnected in, like, Japanese horror. And, like, I feel like a lot of American horror, like, they rely on jump scares now, like the indie ones less so, but like it's so intensely psychological, and I think that's what freaks me out. It's almost like gothic horror, where like, are these characters actually being gaslit into like experiencing terror, or is like their whole world just like now like truly like hosed? And that's terrifying.
Like, don't die at the end. Like sometimes they're just like, okay, this is my life now. I just have to live with this. Like Shudder. Do y'all know the movie Shudder?
Yeah.
Oh my
I don't think I've seen it.
Yes. With like she's like sitting on this bed, like like I could not take a picture for a straight year after I saw that movie.
I wonder if camera sales actually declined in Japan after that movie came out.
Like, nope, we're not taking pictures anymore.
I want that data now.
But yeah, I feel like Japanese horror is just like a whole other level of just merciless supernatural horror. And I feel like that's the kind that like gets the most reaction out of me, but it's also the kind that literally haunts me. And I have to really just be in the mood for like several days of no sleep after that movie to like be able to cope with that. But I'm definitely more of like the gory, like physical, visceral horror. And I think, I don't know, I want to say probably Stephen King was actually my first author that I started getting into like the supernatural horror with, like Pet Sematary, like to this day, I still cannot walk past cemeteries without just like getting the super creeps from that book.
Same.
Well, this is a perfect transition into talking about Misery, because the Stephen King book, and also very visceral, very gory.
Yeah, sure.
So would you want to try doing a 60-second recap of you could choose whether you want to do the book or the movie.
I've only gotten halfway through the book. I'm listening to it on audiobook, and I cannot go faster than like 1.5 speed. That's like my squirrel brain. I just cannot focus. So I've only made it about halfway through the audiobook, but I'm happy to do a little little Spark Notes version if y'all want me to.
Yeah, we can. Or Nenia, do you want to do a full version? We can also flip a coin between.
We're gonna do rock, paper, scissors. Let's go.
Should we? I love that idea. Let's do rock, paper, scissors.
Let's do it.
Okay.
Okay. Wait. Okay. How do we do rock, paper, scissors? Go. Okay. Rock, paper, scissors. Go.
Oh, Nenia won.
So you get Nenia. You can pick who does it.
I think
gonna
our
put the power
guest
in.
should do the summary.
Okay. It's an honor.
That was an empty win. Okay, so Misery is about an author who he was in Colorado, right? Paul Sheldon. And he was in Colorado and he was finishing up a book off of the tail end of his most popular series, Misery. And he got in a car crash and was rescued, quote unquote, by Annie Wilkes, who took him to her like cabin in the Colorado landscape and was under the guise of nursing him back to health, but she was really holding him hostage. And she was not satisfied with the ending of his last book, like the end of the series Misery. So she was basically holding him hostage to get him to write a satisfactory copy for her to read.
10 seconds left.
Yeah. And then of course he like tried to get away and, I don't want to spoil it too much for everyone, but it didn't end well for Annie. Let's just say that.
That is perfect. That is 1 minute exactly. Way to go. So, you're both authors. Do you have any fans?
Personal experience encounter. I will say, I feel like, I remember watching the movie like a while ago, but I feel like it didn't really hit the same until I was actually considering myself an author. Nenia, what do you think?
Are we talking about like the horror of reading it as an author?
Yeah, like the horror of reading it or watching it as an author versus like not being an author.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think we see like a little bit of that like online where people will sometimes like tell authors like how they should be writing their books and like taking issue with the characterization and like almost knowing more about the book than the person who wrote it. So I do think there's like an element of like almost reader entitlement that's at the core of the book.
Yeah.
But also I'm a little biased because I kind of hated Paul Sheldon, at least like the book Sheldon, because I was like, he really hates romance readers. Like, his disdain, like it was very much like, I'm gonna get that romance bag money, but like I also hate all romance readers. So I was like, I want to cut off his feet now.
Right? I wanna
JK.
Yeah, it's interesting because that book was written like 30 years ago, but for him to like, for it to still be so relatable in that aspect, I mean, like they were just like dragging romance back then too, I guess, but it was just very interesting, like seeing, like you said, like that perspective of him still like dunking on romance, even though that was making his biggest money on it. I thought that was really funny too. Yeah. But I also think like, maybe he was writing from experience a little bit too as an author, because I'm sure even back then he had so much flack for, the way some of his characters were written, or way like you said, that reader entitlement. And I remember when I was first listening to the audiobook, all I could think about was like feral Sarah J. Maas or feral Rebecca Yarros readers who were just like, don't touch my insert shadow daddy name here. Right? It was just like they're all like the Annie Wilkes of the romance genre.
Annie Wilkes is like, don't come for my misery, mommy.
Don't come for my historical romance, mommy.
It's funny because like the first edition paperback actually had a clinch cover as an insert, like as a step back. And Stephen King was the male model for the Fabio like art. And I don't know if they actually got her, but like the artist looks like Elaine Duelo, who illustrated a lot of Fabio art.
That is so
Oh man,
funny.
I really want a copy of that. That sounds amazing.
I have a picture. I can send it to both of you.
Please.
Oh
Oh my
my
gosh,
gosh,
we
I
got to
would
put that
love
on the
that.
Instagram. So I know that you were wanting to talk about like how the movie didn't, we can talk about the movie in comparison to the book and how I saw the movie for the first time ever this morning. And
It's fresh in your mind.
it's fresh in my mind. And I only made it 6% into the book because I got really disturbed. But I did read the Spark Notes and listen to other people talking about what happens in the book. And they almost seem, the book and the movie are so different to me.
Mm-hmm.
They almost seem like two different works. The movie was almost a comedy. There were a lot of really funny moments. Whereas the book, I was tense from page 1. I think I made it 30 pages in. I got to the part where I got to the bucket. And then I was like, nope, I can't.
Yeah, that was nasty. Now, I think the movie definitely put some rose-colored glasses on Annie for sure, because the way the movie portrays her, she's off her rocker and she ended up being a serial killer, and that's why she seemed like she was unhinged. But the book makes it so blatantly obvious, from the get-go, this girl is nuts. Just the way that Paul Sheldon describes her as being this emotionless idol and not even really human-like. And I think it just gives that that much more, I guess, depth to her character, but depth in the sense depth that she had no depth beyond what she was reading of his misery stories. She literally just everything that she thought about him was in terms of his story. She didn't even really see him as a person. She just saw him as someone writing her books. Mm-hmm. And I feel especially in this day and age where social media is a big deal and there's a lot of keyboard warriors, I feel a lot of people still feel that way about authors, that whenever you see typos or whenever you see a plot hole that didn't get filled in, you're just ugh, they're just the worst. You're just we are authors are human too. We make mistakes too. Mm-hmm. And I don't think it's I don't think it's as satisfying for people to realize that authors are people too, because they're just trying to escape into this story. And so they don't want to acknowledge, that there could be errors in there too. So I definitely kind of related with Annie Wilkes, just seeing him as just basically a thing that was sitting in her room writing the book for her.
A book
and that gave me the creeps. Yeah.
I think the book did a better job showing the depersonalization that some readers have for authors, but I think the movie did a better job showing the almost emotionally abusive dynamic that can happen when fandom turns toxic. Because for me, the scariest thing was sometimes movie Annie really could be charming and funny and almost reasonable, and then she would be like, I'm going to hurt you now, and I'm like, wait. And I think
typewriter slammed on his knee.
And he would think he was getting to her and making headway, and then she would hurt him even more than she had before. So I feel that I think is most chilling, from an abuse perspective, because abuse often does look like that. Abusers can be charming and can make sense and can even be kind, and then they turn on you. And I think that is what makes the movie so scary for me, because she does feel relatable, whereas the book, she kind of felt almost like a robot or a monster, and so it was harder to relate to her or understand her. She just kind of felt like a monster.
Yeah,
I mean, they're both monsters, but one is more cardboardy.
Yeah, exactly.
I totally agree. I thought it was really funny, the line in the movie, I don't know if this is in the book, Paul asks what she wants him to write and how he's supposed to do it, and she's just like, oh, just your masterpiece.
Right, like that's just so easy to do. Like,
And it's like on one level, she's trying to compliment him and be like, you couldn't write anything other than a masterpiece. But it's also a threat.
Yeah.
and the way she was so critical about him when he was giving, like when he was turning it back into her in the first place, she's like, oh no, this isn't right. It's like, girl, like, what do you want me to write under duress? So like, again, kind of like going back to that, like she didn't really see him as human. She just saw him as someone, like something that's going to fill that void of like the book that she wanted to write.
Your job is to churn out books and entertain me, and I don't care about anything else.
Yeah, that was creepy.
Yeah.
But also, like you said, kind of just like that very like disturbing love that she had for him too. Like, you know, I mean, you would think like, you know, if she really loved him, she wouldn't be treating him like that. Like you said, like I mean, it was a very toxic, abusive relationship. But at the end of it all, I mean, like you said, like he kind of like, oh well, it all ended as well as it could have, I suppose. But I mean, like basically, that was just her downfall, was the fact that she was just so obsessed with him that ended up being basically what helped end her, because she was just like so obsessive with him. And in the movie, didn't she like trip? She tripped and fell on the typewriter. Is that how, like, is that like the official? Is that what happened? I didn't get that far in the book. Is that what happened in the book too?
Don't think so. It's been a while since I read the book. Like,
because that felt like a cop out that she just tripped and fell on the time. I was like, okay, come on, like.
I think in the book he more actively murders her. I've listened to 2 podcasts that I'm going to even share on our Instagram because I thought they did such an incredible job. The Losers Club and Just King Things. And now I kind of want to listen to their entire backlist. I'm so fascinated by Stephen King now. Like, I really did not realize how different his books are from the movie adaptations. And this was the first Stephen King writing I'd ever read. But they were saying, you know, one of the things is it really seems like she hates him.
yeah.
First of all, and they were also saying that it seemed like there was a lot of about addiction in the book, whereas the movie felt to me like it was more about novel writing, which is what I wanted of the book. When I went into this, I was like, novels about novel writing that's one of my favorite tropes. And I think that the book is also about novel writing, but also about like, yeah, this toxic fandom, about addiction. But I
think there's a lot of symbolism in there too, with like how he was crippled. Like he was crippled because he was hurt in the book, but he was also basically addicted to the pain medicine that she was giving him. And I mean, I vaguely knew that, you know, Stephen King had drug issues, but I actually looked it up after, and it was like it was a big part of his life for like, what was like 5 or 10 years. Like he had like a cocaine, like medicine, like he was addicted to it all. And so I think that, yeah. And so, you know, once I realized that, I was like, wow, maybe it was more of like a symbolic, like he was crippled by his addiction, just like Paul Sheldon was crippled in bed, and also like being, I mean, because if he wasn't taking the pain pills, then he just had excruciating pain all the time. And that was his main motivator when he got out of the room the first time, was to go find the pain pills, because like Annie was leaving for long periods of time and not able to come back and give him the medicine regularly. So that was actually his driving force for getting out. And then I was just like, oh my God, like, it kind of makes you think, you know, a rational person would have gone to go find a phone first or like try and get out. But like, no, his first, like his main drive was finding more of the medicine, so he wasn't going into withdrawals and having more pain. And that to me was a very like, I felt like that was definitely like a big part of his character that I noted when I was reading through it. I just thought it was so interesting that like he made a point of highlighting that in the book, because there was like a lot of times where you like when I was reading, I don't remember what the audiobook narrator was, but she did a fantastic job. But like just listening to it, it kind of felt like he was almost like an unreliable narrator in terms of like his, like you could tell like his mind was being affected by these by these pain pills. So then like it kind of goes back to, well, okay, so if he's affected by these pain pills, like how much of his observation of Annie was really true? And how much of it was just like, you know, drug induced? So then it's kind of just like makes you backtrack and be like, okay, like how much of like a reliable narrator is this character even? And I feel like they didn't really highlight that in the movie. They just like made him out to be like a victim that was being, you know, abused.
I think you're so right about that. I think that the movie really didn't emphasize the amount of like addiction was affecting his character in the book. But can we talk about how the words novel and novel are, how similar they are?
Right.
The medication. Because
I think he did it on purpose.
I think so too. Because it doesn't, my understanding is that the more involved he gets with writing this book, that kind of takes over the role of addiction. Like instead of the pain pills, what's getting him by day to day is obsessing and working on this novel. Yeah, I thought that was like
there's like a lot of elements of like creative obstacles, like as a creator too, like, and that could also be symbolic of like how, like, because he wants to pivot. He doesn't feel like romance is giving him like the literary prestige that he wants for his career. He wants to write like the great American novel, but he has all these ambitions but no ideas. And so his captivity with Annie is kind of forcing him to go back to what he's written before, except to do it like with heart this time because his life depends on it. And so I feel like it's interesting to see like the mind of a creator who feels like maybe they've peaked and they want to get to the next plateau, but they don't know how. And so they're struggling and they're suffering. And I feel like that's like a really good metaphor for creative burnout.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. Or just like that like clinging on to the genre that you know that you've had great success with when you want to break out.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Like, you know, I don't want to say like writing to market versus writing what you want, but like that, just like that suppression that you feel like, you know, this is what I'm good at. This is what I've been writing. This is where my success is, but I want to write something completely different. I just don't feel like I can, or it's not going to be well received, or, you know, things like that. So I definitely related to him on that. And like when he had to burn his only manuscript, I was just like that would have been like my worst nightmare. I felt so bad for him
because it was so good. He was like, this is the best thing I've written. And
yeah, and he was like so proud of himself. Like he was like, this is like the embodiment of me. And like, you know, he had mentioned that he had come from a poor background, so the character was relatable to him, and he did a lot of research. He was with the cop who was like teaching him all the skills that he ended up writing in the book. So like it was just so sad when he was like obviously so proud of that book, but you also kind of got a little bit of his like cockiness that he didn't go make a copy of it like immediately. There was like that superstition of like, okay, like, I don't let anyone read this. I don't go make copy. Like, so like there was that level of like, you know, like superstition, but also like superiority. Like, I don't have to do that because I'm Paul Sheldon. Like, this is just how it's always worked for me. So yeah, that was so sad when she was making him burn it. I was just like, oh my gosh, like I would have been dead right there. I just would have like had a heart attack and like the end. Like,
but was it even good? Like maybe part of the reason he never showed it to anyone was because deep down part of him knew it wasn't like his best work too. Like getting back to the unreliable narrator bit. Because he was arrogant and cocky. So maybe he thought it was like a great novel, but it was actually dreck. Because she read it and she didn't like it, right?
But she was also obsessed with his romance stuff. So there was like that skewed bias as well of her not liking it because she was such a super fan of his other stuff. So like we never really know if it was good or not. I think like as an author, you have that same feeling too whenever you're writing a book and you don't know if it's good or not. And you kind of rely on those other people who are reading it to, justify that the book that you wrote is good, versus just like writing it because you want to write it.
Is it good or is it bad?
Yeah. But if it gets in the hands of a reader who's not into that genre or not into your writing style, and they're going to say like, no, I didn't like it. And you're like, oh my gosh, I'm a horrible author. And like the downward spiral begins. I'm garbage. This is garbage. My book is garbage. I agree.
Do you think Annie pushed him to write a better book than he'd previously written? Because it like combined these two parts of himself. I remember the quote, Paul Sheldon wrote 2 types of books, good ones and bestsellers. Do you think she pushed him to write a book that was a good book and bestseller?
I don't know. What do you think?
He seems really happy with the result, even though I have no idea how.
Was his happiness because of the fact that he wrote a good book, or was it his happiness was the book was what helped save his life?
Oh, that's good question.
Like, does he have like some kind of like attachment to it because he wrote it in a time of duress? Like he has like emotional attachment to it, or was it actually his best book?
And I also wonder if his experience in captivity, if that's a metaphor for addiction, if like this deep, dark place that he went to that like brought so much shame and so much pain, he still felt like it helped his craft. I don't know.
I feel like sometimes a lot of like authors do feel that desperation though. Like if you're reliant on, like if you're a full-time author and you're reliant on the sales of your book, like I don't want to say like you're desperate for it to be good, but like that's your main income. So you are reliant on people thinking whether or not it's good. Right. So I think that was definitely like a very real comparison, a real like symbolic showing of an author having that connection to people thinking that their book is good and having that reliance on people thinking that their book is good.
I thought it was interesting how even though he hated Annie and she was like a terror in his life, he was still incredibly desperate for her feedback and her praise. Like she'd be like doing horrible things and then he'd give her the manuscript and he'd be like, well, do you like it? Like, is it good? And I'm like, that's peak author right there. Like, that's how you know like an author wrote this book.
I liked that she kind of at one point even gave him good feedback where she's just like, no, you're being lazy here. You can't be lazy. You have to do it right.
But even then she was so unhinged about it. I was just like, this lady's scary. But again, it kind of goes back to like when she was saying like, no, it wasn't right about like the guy that was stuck in the car, like it went over the cliff, and then the next clip he'd gotten out before it went over the cliff. She's like, no, it wasn't right. I mean, again, it's like she's not really like making the connection that whoever wrote that is human too. Like she like would not accept that. And like she was very like rigid against imperfection.
She kind of thinks he's a god when she's talking about like what did he say? He said that Misery just slipped away, and she's like, no, you killed her.
Yeah. I think she definitely I think you're right. I think part of it is like she did push him to make his craft better because she was such a diehard fan, but also she was a critical person in general. Right. So I think that is like in a very morbid way. Yeah, it helped his craft, but kind of like at what cost?
At what cost? Yeah.
I mean, I really liked it. I'm really looking forward to finishing the audiobook. I'm just one of those people, like, I can only listen to audiobooks, like, in my car. If I'm trying to do literally anything else and listen to audiobooks, I just, like, phew. But I really do want to read the rest of the book. And like I said, I think the movie was great. I think it definitely added another layer of depth like I said, being on the Paul Sheldon side of it, like where you are an author and you do encounter those people online who are like so feral in a good or bad way about your story that they feel like they just like have that input, you know. And like I feel like Paul Sheldon's kind of like the cautionary tale of when authors don't set boundaries, you know, right? Yeah. Nenia, what do you think? Do you have a similar experience?
Yeah, I think Misery does a really good job showing when a reader-author relationship goes toxic. I think it also kind of shows the horror of like wondering if your next book is going to be a critical failure. And it was just really interesting all around. Terrifying, but interesting.
And when she hit his feet with the sledgehammer, I was like, oh.
That scene was like 100 times worse in the book.
It, right?
Well, like, I don't want to give spoilers, but like it was more violent. Actually, so I read Stephen King's memoir, and like this isn't a spoiler because this isn't how the book ends, but like he said how he originally wanted to end the book was like that, like it zooms in on like this bound copy of Misery, and like Paul is nowhere to be seen and all of the medical stuff is cleared away. And then as you zoom in on like the romance cover, you'll realize it's like bound in human skin. And so, like, that was, like, how he, like, I guess, originally imagined ending Misery. And I'm like, okay.
I just got goosebumps.
That is such a metaphor, too, because, like, there's so much, but, like, author-fan relationship, but the author has put so much of themselves into the book that, like, I mean, this is not by their choice, but that they literally become part of their book.
You become
I'm
your
special
art,
edition with sprayed edges.
Extra foiling.
Here. Let's rate it. We can each rate whatever we've seen or read of Misery, based on overall quality, and then based on scariness. And I'm gonna say, like, on a scale of 1 to 10, for example, for me, I'm going to give the movie a 7 on overall quality. I thought it was really funny, actually. I thought it had a lot of good commentary about, novel writing, about the art of writing, about the dynamics between the audience and the writer. And also there were scenes too where like just this moments between the police officer and his wife were so campy. And Annie was almost kind of hard to take seriously, but I am going to give it a 3 for scariness, 3 out of 10 for scariness, because the hobbling scene, awful, like totally disturbing. And also, it's such a classic moment in horror history and horror cinema. So I'm going to give that, that's going to be my rating for the movie. For the book, oh man, I don't know if I can rate it on quality because it is really not my type of book. And I don't know if I can rate it on scariness, but I will tell you, I tapped out at 6%. Nenia, what would you rate of whatever you would like to rate?
I'd give the movie like a 7 or a 7.5 out of overall quality, and probably like the same for scary. Like there was only one scene in that movie that scared me, and you probably know which one. And for the book, I think for overall quality, I'd give it like a 4 because it made me really angry with all of like the misogyny. I feel like the movie did a good job getting rid of that and making it less dated. For overall scariness of the book, I think I'd say 9. Like I don't think I'll ever read that book again. It was just too gross and horrible. But it scared me.
I think that's totally fair.
I
JC,
agree.
What about you?
I'd probably give it like a 7 out of 10. I mean, the movie was made in like
Who's with us?
1990.
Who's this?
Oh, sorry. This is my cat,
Aww.
Cheshire. He was crying at the door, so I had to go let him in.
Look at the little airplane ears.
But yeah, I would give it like a 7 out of 10 just because like the movie was made in 1990. And for that era, it still did pretty good, like as far as like, quality, cinematography, things like that. And for scary, I'd probably give it like maybe like a 2 or 3. I mean, I think they definitely could have been more graphic with their like gore scenes, kind of like Nenia was saying, like the book is so much more descriptive of the graphic scenes. And I think like, part of it was like the movie was made in 1990 and that like wasn't very popular back then to have a bunch of like gore in your horror. Unless you're like going for like a slasher movie, and that was not a slasher movie. So I think like they definitely could have gone harder into that, and that would have made it really scary. The book so far, I think I kind of agree with Nenia. Like I don't really like Paul Sheldon's attitude towards women in general. So like maybe like a 5, maybe like a 5.5 out of that. But I definitely think the psychological and the gore of it is much more scary. So I would give it like an 8 out of 10 for scary. I'm definitely getting more into the book than I am the movie.
Mm-hmm. Well, this has been so much fun. Where else on the internet can people find you?
Like I said, you can find me pretty much anywhere. I am still on Amazon. I'm on Kobo. I have like my stuff in Hoopla and Overdrive, so you can go request me at your library if your library goes through those venues. And of course, like my website. So I love to shower my people who buy my books with all sorts of stickers and bookmarks and character art, all the good little bits. So if you buy from my website, then I'll shower you with love. And you get a signed copy. So, but yeah, you can find me anywhere.
Do either of you have anything else you want to wrap up with?
I just want to say thank y'all so much for having me. It's been so awesome talking to you in person, especially I feel like Nenia and I like both haunt threads to an unhealthy degree. So I'm always seeing her with her post on threads. And so it's kind of cool to like come around full circle. And I learned about the horror / stories podcast before I knew that Nenia was going to be on here. So I was like, what a small world. So it was very cool to like have it all come full circle.
Yay.
I'm so glad I've finally met y'all and found the podcast, and I'm very grateful that y'all are letting me on.
Of course.
It is such a pleasure to talk to you. And oh my gosh, what
Don't
was I
forget
gonna
to
say?
subscribe to Horror / Stories podcast.
Yes, that exactly.
Best co-host ever.
Literally, Nenia is my favorite podcast sibling. But thank you so much. I'm really enjoyed reading your book, and also I was so scared to watch this movie, and I ended up really liking it. So this definitely pushed my limits a little bit, but in a good way. But you are a delight. Both of you are delights, and yeah, have a great rest of your day.